everyone. This is Carl here with my buddy Eric.
Hello.
And welcome back to Tabletop Tango. If you like what you see, subscribe, like. We're not looking to be famous, but it'd be cool to see the numbers go up. So today,
up a little bit,
yeah, a little bit. So today we're doing another review, Tabletop Tango Reviews, and today we're doing a really, I think, kind of a cool book called Monster Hunters Club. And so, do you want to, before we get into kind of the genre, what it's let's just give kind of what the kind of the logistics of the book or the basic of the book.
So Monster Hunters Club, it is it's a licensed product for Savage Worlds. It's written by Darren G. Miller, is the main designer, and you can get it on RPG Now, and we'll probably repeat this at the end too. You can get it at RPG Now for $20. The PDF is $20, and then you can also get a softcover and a hardcover for $35 and $45. So there is a lot of options for this one. So this one. And this one's a beefy book. It's a beefy boy. We'll get more into that as we go. But yeah, I mean, let's get right into it, Carl. Monster Hunters Club. What's the genre here? What is it?
So what this book is trying to accomplish is to give you that feel of that 80's movie where kids are coming of age and they're solving mysteries or confronting the supernatural. So think of things like The Goonies. Which is a classic in that vein. And then more recently, everybody talks about Stranger Things.
Stranger Things is, that's a giveaway.
That's
I would say things...
Go ahead.
Things like Super 8, E.T., the extraterrestrial, Monster Squad, which is a personal favorite of mine growing up. They even have a recommended viewing list, which is awesome for things like this, for genre things. They do list stuff like... it's funny, they list like The Last Starfighter, and they list Gremlins, and The Sandlot, and like Stand By Me, which those are like certainly that 80's feel, but this book is very supernatural. I mean, it's really about the 80's supernatural. So those will give you kind of that feeling, but yeah, this is those 80's supernatural. But let's talk about that a little bit, Carl. I just want to briefly touch on the kind of 80's movie, because well, nostalgia, love it or hate it, it's a big part of our experiences, especially nerds, right? We're all about that. But I would say that, even if you don't have the total nostalgia for 80's, if you're older or younger, where you don't really have that, I think the 80's are an interesting time, and, the media of that time is very interesting, and it really does reflect this kind of, like you said, this coming-of-age supernatural genre well, just how Stranger Things kind of pulled it off, besides just being nostalgic, just because the 80's were such an interesting time where you had, there's a lot of technology, we know more about the world, but there's no internet yet, there's no cell phones, there's no pagers, so while you are connected, and there's a lot of kids back then had a lot of resources like comic books and video games and arcades, and there was a lot of malls, there was all this amenities more than ever before, but you still didn't have that same connectivity of the kind of the 90's and the aughts. So I think it has this really cool space of where the imagination for all these things can be huge, just because there's all these movies coming out, right, and TV shows and stuff. But you don't have the full-on internet and the kind of the death of some of that, where you still had to play outside. There was TV, but you still had to go
connectivity,
outside.
And I think part of what makes games interesting is, there's got to be that sense of danger, and you get that in these 80's movies because, yes, there's communication, maybe they got walkie-talkies, yes, there's ways of, moving around more quickly, people have cars, but you still have that sense of disconnected. So when you're lost, you're lost. There's not just, you don't have to try to pull out that trope of I don't have my cell phone signal, and that's why my cell phone's not working. They really didn't have cell phones except for the big bricks, I guess, but they didn't really have those kinds of mechanisms.
But the kids won't have that.
And the kids won't have that.
The kids won't have that. And so I don't know if you agree with me, but I really think that's a strong point for this, is that it's not just about the nostalgic, which is huge. If you like 80's movies, and this is the genre for you. But I do think it just occupies that really cool space where you can kind of live out these full-on child, supernaturally coming of age stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's. I think we kind of went over what it means to accomplish. I mean, it means to accomplish giving you this cinematic 80's supernatural kid experience. Right? Anything else to talk about in the
No, I think that hit. I mean, again, we gave a bunch of examples of movies, and if you've seen those movies, you know what it's trying to do.
Cool. Let's move right along to the format and layout section. Let's talk about readability and graphics. What do you think, Carl?
I really liked the so let's talk about the graphics a little bit. I really did like the style. It's really kind of it's not trying to be photorealistic. It's kind of cartoony in a lot of regards. It's black and white. It's got a nice
not art, the graphic design.
Oh, graphic design. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You mean okay. the kind of the layout?
The layout, the text, the graphic design, yeah. How easy it reads to you.
I thought it read pretty well. I mean, the font they use is really nice. The layout of the book is put together pretty good. It doesn't go overboard with just loading up with graphics, but then it also breaks up the flow nicely. I think I like that they bold things that are important to bold that kind of harken to another part of the book. Some books don't do that. Overall, I thought the layout was pretty good.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, the text is it's very Stranger Things, and Stranger Things is very. I actually can't really, off the top of my head, remember the influences they have, but it's like straight Stranger Things graphics. So if you think of the Stranger Things, and I'm sure Carl will show us some examples, it is like the Stranger Things text. But yeah, everything's very clean to read. I kind of like the little touches they have. I agree with you. The bold things are a nice touch. Moving on to organization and navigation. Now this part, it's kind of a weird one for me, Carl, because so we only have I bought the PDFs. We bought the PDFs, so right. I do not know what the hardcover or softcover looks like. The table of contents it's
pretty sparse,
relatively sparse. It definitely could have used, and that's fine for a table of contents. I mean, it has the main sections. I would say more about the index is also a little sparse. They do have some nice references. They do have a couple references in the back. But the kind of negative part for me here is that, and maybe Carl will show this. Now, I'm not sure if this is a problem with my PDF browser. I mean, Carl, you have the same problem and you use a different one than me.
I use Reader. Yeah, I use Preview from Mac. So these are two different readers, two different architectures.
And yeah, for me, for game PDFs, the bookmarks are essential. And if I'm paying for, I feel like this is a swag product, this is a little bit more premium, I really want good bookmarks. I think that's just a requirement. And this, for whatever it is, definitely fell flat here. It's kind of a jumbled mess. It gives you like all of the archetypes and other random things in the beginning. And then it talks about the chapters. It's definitely like a weird jumble, and there's no kind of, for me, for more premium product, I like kind of the main sections and then with kind of sub bookmarks, so you can expand like the main table of contents, like chapters, and then you can see the different individual things. The main course Wade book does this really well. So this one was probably the weakest point of the book for me. I'll just say that now. Like, I think this is a jumbled mess. And again, we don't know for sure this is how it is, but at least in two different readers, this was... How did you feel about it, Carl?
I thought... so I like to have really good bookmarks because on a PDF, jumping between, you can't just flip it. I think I'm preaching to the choir. Everybody knows how the PDFs... How you need to have a good reader, right? So, because of the way they had kind of the chapters listed at the bottom, and then they had some subsections at the top, but it wasn't clear what section it belonged to. Like, you had character creation types kind of mixed in there, and then it made it really difficult to kind of jump around the book to really find what you're looking to find. And for kind of doing a review, there was a lot of trying to jump around, and you're not just reading it straight through. You're trying to take advantage of, I'm doing character creation, but then what does that mean for setting? And then what does that mean? And then it was hard to kind of get through that. But that is like that's a minor quibble overall, I think. Though it's very important if you're going to use this book as a reference. Yes. Constantly.
For me, it's a bigger thing because that's what I look to, and especially when I expect from a more professional product. But yeah, totally agree. Let's move on to the final part of this section, which you were talking about earlier, is art. So finish what you were saying about that before I
forgot. What was that? No, I think I think the style of the art is very. It's got a cartoon feel. It's got that kind of. It's trying to evoke that emotion. It's black and white.
All the art is black and white. We should say all of it.
Yeah. So I mean, it's it's nice. It sticks with its own style. It sticks with its own vision. I think they did it pretty well. I don't think it screams necessarily 80s movie necessarily, but I think they did a really nice job. It was entertaining to look at. It broke up the book nicely. They had images in the right spots. Like they had an image for every character archetype. Yes. So you could kind of, I thought that was really nice. Some books don't do that. They talk about all the different kinds of ways you could build characters, and then they got one picture of a particular character, and that's sort of it. This did a nice job of sort of weaving in the pictures to add some flavor.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. As you said, I'll just say there's a ton of art in here, and that's something I greatly appreciate. And every single archetype, as you said, every single beast in here, there's tons of like scene art just to set the mood. I mean, there's just so much art in here. They actually used a bunch of artists. I would kind of agree it's a little cartoonish, and it doesn't quite scream the 80s movie to me. Some of the style, it's mostly done pretty consistently, which is a good thing. But some of the artist style, while they're all very good artists, they're not quite my cup of tea. That's just a personal flavor thing, though, I think. But some are kind of I just like more than the others. So maybe it would have been better to stick with less artists just to have a even more cohesive feel. But you can't complain too much. I mean, there's just so much art in here that it covers all the bases. And some of the scene art is just amazing. I mean, there was some of the stuff that really was evocative of kind of setting the mood for you. So totally agree. It's a little bit of a mixed bag for me, but generally I would say it's on the positive side for sure. Cool. Let's move right along to the lore and the writing. First thing we'll talk about here is the flavor. I'm just going to say this now, Carl. This thing is chock full of flavor. It almost has too much flavor. It's amazing. I mean, they did not skimp on kind of, and when I talk about flavor, this is kind of talking about the genre and the feel of it without kind of giving you the specific setting details. They give you so many examples of 80s movie and what it means to be a kid and the child's experience. I mean, every edge they give has like a paragraph before it of like fun dialogue or just this thing has so much flavor. It's insane. I mean, they did not skimp on the flavor. I would say almost it was like a little bit too much in some of the edge stuff when you just kind of wanted to get to the kind of the meat of the edge. It would be like a paragraph or something of flavor, but that's kind of a minor complaint. Do you think? I mean,
do you think all this flavor limits its what am I looking to say?
Like the navigation.
It's ability to be used for more than just one thing, right? There's so much flavor, and it is like this is 80s movie, kids coming of age kind of feel. Does it limit it now because there's so much flavor?
I mean, yeah, it limits to the genre, but I personally don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, they leaned in and they leaned in hard. Like they did not. They just went. I mean, they Savage Worlds. They went fast and furious, and they cranked this dial up to 15. I mean, they pumped this full of what exactly you would expect from this genre and this type of game that they want to evoke.
Yeah, and it's cool. I think it's cool as all be. I mean, the flavor. Even if, like you said, even if you weren't a kid of the 80s, you know what a kid of an 80s was going through.
Yes.
By reading this book. So.
And not just 80s, just kind of reminding us what it's like to be a kid. Like, honestly, like that's a big part of this too, is because they really want you to be that child. I mean, have that child's mind. Think of the mind as a child. You know, you're not so cynical yet. You're much more innocent. And we'll talk. There's a lot of mechanics that back this up too. But I said the only kind of negative for me is that not even just with the edges. There was parts where I kind of wanted the actual mechanics, and they were a little bit kind of lost in the just deluge of flavor. But generally it wasn't that bad. Like that, some of the times I was a little bit confused, but it really wasn't that bad. So I think more on the positive than any negatives.
I thought the flavor was, I thought the flavor was fantastic. Cool. But it limits it to, that's what it's trying to do, and it's doing it really damn well. So, and
it's doing it, yeah. Let's move on to the setting, and there is a setting here, Carl. What did you think about their setting?
So the setting, I thought the setting was pretty good. You can tell that the authors of the book were trying to take all these different, again, 80s movies and kind of crush them together to give you a little piece. So it just kind of set the stage. You're in a southern town called Gulf Haven, And within the setting, they define a number of places. They give you a lot of history of the setting or of the Gulf Haven. And you can see how the authors kind of sprinkled in some history that can play into your campaign that you can just pick it up. They talk about there's pirates, there were Civil War battles that were kind of mysterious. There was this mysterious man who destroyed crops and all sorts of crazy stuff that you can see they're going, I'm just going to lay this out here so any game master can pick that up as part of the history of this Gulf Haven and kind of bring it into their game. They have a really nice, I don't know, you want to talk about Gadgetry yet or just focus more on the setting?
No, we'll save that for the setting. I mean, yeah, they list, not only do they list the history, they list like shops and locations of interest. They also list persons of interest. So they definitely do, it's not a huge amount, but it's enough to really give like story hooks for the GM. I would say my biggest complaint here, and this one I think is valid, is there's no map.
I was going to say, that's why I asked if we were talking Gadgetry. Okay. Exactly. That's my biggest, same thing. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm glad. So, I think it is valid because they give you all these locations of interest, but don't give you a map, which is just kind of, and maybe there's one, I kind of did a glance of RPG now. I didn't see like a bonus map, but even if there was a bonus map and maybe it was a Kickstarter thing, like, cause this was a Kickstarter project, it should be in the book because there's no way that you have all of this. Like the players are going to want to see a map, so you're going to have to find a map. Like yes. I'm honestly just completely confused by this, Carl, because there's so much in this book is so big. There's so much art. Like why is there not a map? I'm just utterly confused.
Yeah, and I look at the official setting. They should have looked at ETU as an official and said this is kind of the way to do that. There's a lot of locations. They put the kind of the plot hooks that are within each location, the people in the location, but they give you this nice map that kind of ties it all together. That is a gaping hole because there's so many really cool places to visit. They got arcades, they've got stores, they got weird people, they've got all sorts of stuff, but there's no relationship to where they live.
I have no idea.
Yeah, these neighbors, I don't know, right? So...
And it's not like they didn't have the art budget, So yeah, it definitely boggles my mind. But generally, I think the setting, besides that, it's good. It gives you, it doesn't go off too much. It gives you enough to kind of deal with. And you get it. We all get it. Like what this stuff's about. So any more thoughts on the setting?
Just the takeaway is they definitely try to lay some, tee up some really nice things that you can, as the game master, kind of pull and you have to take advantage of. So I think they did a really nice job on the setting to kind of evoke that feel you expect from these kind of 80s kids movies where everything's sort of interesting and unique. But anyway, I'm beating a dead horse here. So definitely like the setting.
Cool. Let's talk about the new features and setting rules. I think here, Carl, we might even just talk about the archetypes. I know you were kind of thinking that's a character option, but I'd almost talk about it here.
Oh,
that's cool. Let's talk about the archetypes.
I am not beholden to tradition, so we can talk about it right now if you want.
Let's talk about new feature setting rules. So one of the main things that you'll see in this book are the archetypes. This is when you start the game. And let's not even go beyond that. There's a whole mechanics here with being a child and what that means and what do adults mean. Generally, being a child is a major hindrance. And it's even more than that. There's stuff like, besides the less skills, like driving and piloting takes a bigger hit when you're trying to raise it because, kids. Common knowledge is replaced with riding for bikes. Like any type of firearms that you would get, take a -4 to hit. There's an innocence mechanic, which we'll talk about later, that's kind of like scaling fear and spellcasting mods based on the rank. So they do all these things to make you kids feel like a kid. And then when you start the game, you play as an archetype. Now, this is a huge chunk of the game.
Big part of the
chunk
book.
of the book.
Big part of the book.
Yeah, and the archetypes are basically these kind of, exactly what it sounds, these kind of like cliche or just like archetypal,
they're like movie tropes. They're the movie tropes.
Yeah, movie tropes. Yeah, thank you. And their character creation kind of it's a character creation method. So when you pick an archetype, and this can be anything like the popular kid, the freak, the daredevil, the chunk, the clown. So it really goes all over the place. It gives you basically kind of the attributes, like if you have any bonus attributes that you start with, and it tells you how many attributes to take. It tells you about your skills if you start with any extra skills. It tells you what kind of edges and hindrances that you take. And then it even gives you there's kind of almost like a sub archetype in each one, where each options. One will have kind of like variants of the thing. So if we take the star, for example, you could be a actor or actress. You could be a rock star. So each of them kind of have even these little tiny tweaks, and each of those give you some extra edges and hindrances, and some very specific ones too, some new ones. And then at the end, you'll be able to like choose gear and then personalize it with some more hindrances and some normal character creation stuff. So it's definitely trying to really, 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 again, like lean into these tropes, like Carl said. So just that was the overview of those. How do you feel about this whole thing, Carl?
I think it's interesting that sometimes people who play Savage Worlds, a little bit of their complaint is that there's too much freedom. You're building a character, you can do anything you want.
Especially starting out.
Yeah, starting out. And this says, so you've seen these movies, you understand, it's like, what do you want to be based on this movie? Oh, I want to be a jock. Well, we've got you covered. We've got this archetype that kind of gives you the jock as a starting point, gives you some options. It's like, well, no, I'm kind of the nerdy guy. Okay, we got you. Even the guys who do the gadgets, crazy gadgets, and even to the point of the psychokinetic people, anything that you see in these movies, because that's where some of the arcane backgrounds start playing in.
We'll cut in right here, Carl. All the arcane backgrounds, you have to take that specific archetype. So for the 4 arcane backgrounds, there's an archetype for that. Sorry, carry on. I just wanted to make sure.
And I think that's kind of like you said, it's leaning into it. So if you want to have, if you want to, you got to be like I forget the name. Is that a gadgeteer? Because I'm trying to look right now.
Yeah, there's a gadgeteer. Yeah,
I'm trying to click in my little side panel that has the bookmarks, and I'm not finding it. So, but the gadgeteer,
the gadgeteer is the one. Yeah,
who gives you that kind of the weird science feel, and it's really kind of it's nice to have that. And then there's the normal kid where you can kind of build what you want if these don't have. Yeah, but it's really cool. You just kind of. It feels like this is a good way to get up and running really fast as well. Just pick that trope, pick the character class, said a dirty word. So pick the archetype that kind of matches that. Pick which one of the options that seem to match, and you're good to go. Yeah. It's really kind of... And it's a big part of the book, so it's good that it works, because otherwise you lose a lot of value there. So
that's why we're talking about it a lot. Yeah, I agree with you. I really, really like this. I think they did an amazing job on these, and not just because. Normally I would say like I'm a big fan of archetypes or archetype type things with Savage World, just getting that bigger boost, kind of making each character feel different. I'm personally a big fan of that. What I'm usually not a fan of is kind of like giving people kind of set hindrances for things. But I think in this, how they do it in this, and just this genre, this book, it really works. Like, I don't mind it at all, and you still have a lot of customization or not a lot, but you do have good customization that you can do, even within these, so I think it does really work. And because this is such a strong genre setting book, that this works just to kind of lean in, even more. Just accept these hindrances, And I also want to say, Carl, they did a really good job of like the minutia. I mean, you have the geek, but you also have the freak, and you have like the brain. I mean, there's not just the one, like they didn't just say, oh, there's a nerd character. Like, no, there is different types of nerds, and each of those kind of nerds have their own thing too, So I really like how they kind of they didn't skimp on these. There's a lot, so you will not feel shortchanged with options here.
Yeah, I was trying to count out how many archetypes there are, but I think
I counted before. I wrote it down. There's like 14 or something, or 1, 2, 3. We'll show it later, but yeah, there's a good amount. You won't feel, and like you said, the normal kid is there for just whatever. Cool. I think we'll just move on now to the kind of other new things that they do. So as I said before, one of the other new setting rules is kind of adults. Now, adults in the game have a couple different things, and it's a little bit spread out, but generally adults will have extra toughness versus kids. They have something called the Voice of Authority, which they can kind of use at any time, and it's like a +2 opposed spirit roll that you have to follow a command. Adults can also do stuff like some of the other like setting rules are being grounded. That's something that obviously adults can do. Adults also play into when arcane backgrounds, which we'll talk about later. How do you think they did with adults, Carl?
I think they did. There are some mechanical pieces there, but you can't. Voice of Authority being one, adults kind of how they interact, like you said, from a toughness standpoint, but I don't think there's a need to have a lot of mechanics. I mean, this should be role playing, and so it's just there to give that flavor of. I think the Tales from the Loop, which is in a Savage Worlds, does it a little better. It doesn't get overly involved with saying there's mechanics to the adults. It's just a story element of it. Because Voice of Authority, so there's +2 spirit roll, and then you have to do kind of what they're telling you to do. Well, that takes away player agency and it takes away some role playing. That's personal kind of opinion. So anyway,
interesting.
Yeah.
I actually like how they did adults. I mean, I don't think they put too much in. I do like how they have some mechanical stuff in there, just because things can get away from you in the game, whatever. So there's just kind of some hard things that like you are a kid, right? And this is just like. Adults just have this over kids. So I think because being adults, this helps kind of more tamper you down into being like, these are your superiors, your social superiors. So I liked it, but I do see what you're saying is that it could be a little bit role playing, but I think that just depends on the group, right? So
absolutely.
So some of the other things, they don't have a ton of setting rules. They do a little blurb about arcades, and it's enough. It's enough that gives you kind of. I'm just going to go over these real quick, Carl.
Go ahead.
Gives you enough. They talk about bullies and toadies, which they give a little section about bullies, and then these are in the bestiary. They talk about how they work. They talk about the grounded, which is a little bit longer. They more give examples for GMs. And then the kind of main... So how do you feel about those little ones, I guess, Carl?
I mean, they're absolutely the flavor. They add to that flavor of the game, for sure. Arcades... the arcade part is kind of interesting, and maybe you got some thoughts, but there's some edges and things based on arcades, but arcades doesn't really have other than it adds flavor. It doesn't really do much, right? Other than it's a piece of flavor. So from a setting rule, there's arcades, and to do well at it, you'd make agility or smarts test depending on the game, but okay. It's got to all be about role playing, and you're fighting the guy who's the pinball wizard, and that changes the outcome of the story somehow or whatever. But there's not like mechanical advantage, so it was kind of weird. But
I agree with you there. I can't even imagine, even if you had a game where because there could be a jock in the game, there could be all these other ones that arcades probably wouldn't be a huge part of the game unless you made it that way. So it's kind of a little bit the edge is definitely weird. Bullies and toadies, how did you think? Just real quick.
Oh, that makes complete sense. And then adding in the fact that they do a nice job in the bestiary, it really it can become really an interesting part of the game. And there's hindrances too that make you more susceptible, or maybe that's not the right term, but
to bullies,
makes you kind of a magnet for bullies.
It's fleshed out enough.
It's
like they did enough. They didn't do too much.
But you can ignore it if you want to, because if that's not like part of what you're trying to do, it's easy to ignore it and not worry about it.
For sure.
They do.
The grounded.
Grounded makes sense. I mean, it adds some great flavor there, and I like the fact that the kids could attempt the persuasion roll to avoid being grounded. So again, it's adding flavor, but it's a social conflict, right? Basically,
for sure.
So anyway,
cool. Let's move on. They do the heroes never die, which makes sense in this type of game.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because it's kids. I mean, I think that you could probably have a kid death, but you really would want it to be, like a very rare occurrence that would have like kind of a humongous, world-shattering consequences for everybody. But it's a thing in the movies too. I mean, So it's not like it's not there, but so there's a kids never die, heroes never die. I think just real quick, right? Thumbs up, Carl, for this.
Oh yeah, we like
it works
for this kind of thing. Yeah,
it's not
sure.
new. Some of the more newer thing is called Innocence. So basically, Innocence
Very
is
interesting.
it's a scaling kind of I believe now I was a little bit confused at first, but when you're kind of younger, because the ranks are you getting older and going up through school.
Right.
As you get older, it's easier to resist fear, I believe. Like you get a +1 to that fear roll. So when you're when you're novice, you actually have a -1 to fear rolls. So you're just going to be more easily scared. But as you become older, it's kind of you resist that better. And then the other thing with Innocence, we'll just talk about that now.
Might as well cover the whole because it's an interesting mechanic that's weaved into a couple of areas.
A couple of different things. Yeah, it's also with spellcasting. So basically, as you gain in ranks, you actually take a minus to your spellcasting. Kind of to emote
because you're getting older and you're losing innocence.
You're getting older. Yeah, and I think that they're trying to really show it here that like it's a weird space where like, is all of this real or is this in their imaginations? I think it's supposed to be real, but it's kind of like that whole, believe in the fairy kind of idea where belief is magic. And as you get more cynical and older, the kind of the non-belief in magic makes it harder to do magic. So I think that's kind of where it lands, but you could, I guess, kind of go either way. So as you gain in ranks, you have that minus to your spellcasting. Now there's some edges that help with that, but it's an interesting mechanic. And we'll talk about the spellcasting a little bit later. Did you like Innocence?
I thought it was, again, you can ignore it if you want to, but I thought it was an interesting, because you're playing with the hindrances of being young and you have all those negatives that come, but now you've got a positive side of it for being younger. And so if you talk about, I want to play an older character, well, there's a negative to that from an innocent standpoint. To go along with that. So I thought it was kind of cool. It definitely is playing off, like you said, it's playing off those the movie tropes where the younger kids, their imagination helps drive these magical energies, whereas adults can't because adults don't believe anymore, right?
Yes.
Santa Claus isn't real because adults don't believe in Santa Claus, right?
But exactly.
For an innocence, for a younger, these things are real, and there's actually one of the archetypes I think is storyteller. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, which is one of the spellcasting.
Yeah. So it's their stories become real. And because they're innocent and they believe them, right? So it's a nice. I think it's cool. I'm rambling on a little bit, but I think it's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's really good for what it does, and again, it really helps because we're adult players. It kind of helps force you into the mind of a child and what they're going for. On that note, there's a kid-sized fear, which is just basically they just modified the fear table just to be more. Which we don't have to talk too much more about it, but yeah, I think it's good. It makes sense. Basically, you can just have like a permanent phobia, or you can get like a mark of fear, which is like a cool like rogue white streak in your hair or whatever. So they talk about that. There's a kids and teens. They talk about this now. So we talked about the kids. Now they do kind of put like instead if you want to be a teen and you take that as a minor hindrance. This one kind of threw me, Carl. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a little confused on how this fits with the archetypes. Because there's no teen archetype. It's just like you take the teen hindrance. Also, it feels weird to have like a teen in the party with the kids. I mean, I know it's like a trope in the movies, but it doesn't really fit here. And then if you wanted to do like an all teen thing, I really don't think it would work with the tools that are given here. So I was a little confused by this. Like, I get why they did it because it is a thing. Like, if you think of the Goonies, right? There was like the kids, and then there was the older horny teens.
Well, I mean, even in Stranger Things, right? There's the older brother and the older sister, right?
I just don't think it really fits here. I don't know. How did you think?
Well, I guess I just assumed that you, when you talk about the archetypes, one of the hindrances they say you have to take is kid major. I just assumed that you would be that archetype with a teen minor instead of the kid major. So you still would be the chunk, but you're the older chunk.
Teenager?
You're a teen chunk. But I agree with you that if you want to play a teen movie, you want to be a Disney teen movie or whatever teen movies are, this is not probably the setting for that. It really is geared towards, those middle schoolers doing cool stuff.
I would say like those, and we should have talked about this in the beginning, but other kind of systems that do this that I've played too are like the Apocalypse Engine games like Monster Hunters or Monster of the Week. There's also Kids on Bike. The Tales from the Loop.
Tales from the Loop is the one I had.
So those are all kind of, we forgot to bring that up, but as far as doing a teen game, I would just recommend one of those Apocalypse Engine ones. I played both Monster Hearts and Monster of the Week. I love Monster Hearts, but Monster of the Week is also good. And those kind of are the kind of, Buffy, like that level of like teen supernatural romance. I think that does it much better. I would, and if somebody chooses teen, it just seems like mechanically they have some advantages because you're still a novice character. So the innocence, like I don't know. I guess I was just not really sure how it all fit together, and it just seems so weird. So personally, I just wouldn't allow teens if I was doing this, but it's there. Cool. And then the final thing, kind of setting rule, is school. It's mostly flavor. They just talk about school.
Yeah, they say kids are in school. Kids have school.
You're in school.
There's really no mechanical thing about it. It's just you're in school or you're not. So
cool. So anything else about kind of the new feature setting rules, or
I'm just scrolling through them here. Yeah, I don't see anything that's really stands out beyond what we already talked about. So then
let's talk about character options. Carl, how'd you feel? We'll start with hindrances, right? How'd you feel about the hindrances?
I thought they didn't go crazy and add a million hindrances and a million edges, but the ones they did pick, I thought were nice. They added some interesting flavor. Like I like the kind of the cheating magnet. I'm looking in the book, trying to click on the side, find it in there, and I'm not finding it. But there's like the cheating magnet where people try to cheat off you constantly, and it just adds to the kind of, the kids having problems that are kid problems, a bully magnet, that sort of thing. So I thought it was pretty cool. I could see taking some of those hindrances, which is usually how I judge. If it's like, well, the hindrances in a book are fine, and whatever you put in your setting are like, whatever. Here, I could see myself taking some of them because they'd be kind of cool.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I loved, and I guess we can just talk about hindrances and edges at the same time.
Sure.
This is one of the interesting ones where, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like usually books will have more edges than hindrances added.
Normally,
this adds more hindrances than edges, I think. I'm pretty sure.
There's a lot of
seems
them
like
there.
it. Yeah, and usually, like, I would think, like, oh, you don't need to add many hindrances. I mean, we talked about that in our last review. But, man, did they add a good amount of hindrances? I mean, like, they didn't go crazy, but most of the time, you don't get this many. And I think they did an excellent job. Like, they're all so, I mean, ADHD, Cheater's Mark, Bully Magnet, Class Clown, Malicious Envy, Crush, Older Sibling Shadow. I mean, they added all these ones that, they really, really had to think about, like, not just 80s stuff, but again, being a kid.
Yeah,
what is it like being a kid? A crush minor. I mean, some of these could have been quirks. A lot of these could have been quirks, but I appreciate that they spelled them out just, again, because most of the people who are playing this are adults, and it's often hard to kind of go back and think about how you were as a kid. And so this really, really gives you that flavor and that kind of put you in the mindset of what it means to be a kid. Now, a lot of these you'll just get from your archetypes, but there's a lot here. The edges, there's not a ton of edges. A lot of these, again, are tied to the archetypes. A lot of the ones you get here. There's only a couple of power edges, which I was actually surprised on. I thought there'd be more just because of the way when we talk about the powers. But yeah, I mean, I was more impressed by the hindrances, I'll say, but the edges, there's enough. I mean, you don't need a ton of edges, right, to kind of elicit this. So, and there's some weak on the edges, but yeah.
And there's some edges that are, again, they're almost. The game master would have to go out of their way to make them interesting and useful. Like, for example, Iron Stomach, which is, you can eat garbage and get a +2 vigor roll to avoid getting sick. It's like, I mean, it adds to the flavor, but, I just picture your game you're playing where the game master, there's something that somebody has to eat. And thank God somebody's got Iron Stomach. So.
I think Carl, that is a really good point. I think some of these edges, they're super evocative of being a kid in the 80s movies. They're definitely less mechanically strong than other edges you can take. I think it would be definitely up to the GM to have these things, like, to be aware of, like, the whole Iron Stomach example, like if that kid has a bully, he's making him eat worms, he's making him eat dirt or something. That would be a big thing if he had this iron stomach. Like, he wouldn't throw up everywhere and be embarrassed, or he could show off to people to eat something or whatever. So I think it kind of, a lot of these edges definitely rely on the GM to make them exactly as you said, Carl. That's a really good point.
And if the GM,
a lot of these I wouldn't really take in other games because these are so in this being a kid.
They're very specific in a lot of regards.
Yeah, they're all very specific.
But again, if you're a game master and you're playing this game, you're probably leaning into it anyway, and there's going to be something where the chunk has to, take one for the team and eat the rotten thing, because that's what's going to make the pirate, accept them for one of their, whatever, right? So you're going to lean into that and make that work. So it's kind of fun.
Put it in. Yeah. So final thing here, I think we'll talk about gear. How did you find the gear, Carl?
Well, I like how they state that the gear is very kid-oriented, the kinds of things you get, even weapons or what have you. So they're really aligned. There's no heavy weapons. We don't talk about guns. They talk about, there's a slingshot.
They do talk about guns. Well, they in the very beginning, they say that while guns can exist, it would be like a huge thing to get one with a huge amount of, consequences. Right. And again, you have those minuses to using them. So while it is a thing, it's like, this is like a legendary magic weapon. Sorry, go on.
No, but you're absolutely right. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah. The equipment list that they provide, there's things like BB guns and wrist rockets and stuff like that. Again, the kinds of things a kid would have. That's not to say that, a kid might not be able to get their hands on a gun, but it's going to be a crazy rare thing versus your normal game. Everybody's running around with a pistol on their belt. Here it's unique and it's different, and all the weapons are much less powerful, and because you're so you feel less with the equipment, you feel less powerful. You don't have that power in your hands, and so you got to think. And again, that evokes the image of kids kind of coming to their own and trying to solve problems without pulling a gun and shooting something, right? So it's kind of, I think the equipment plays well into what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not a huge list, but it's comprehensive enough where it gives you those options and really leans into, the kind of vehicles like skateboards, roller skates, whatever. The armor is like a catcher pad or a leather jacket. Yeah, that's a trash can lid for a shield. Cool. Yeah. So they definitely did a good job, and there's some cool stuff like, people who are maybe younger than the 80s era, they wouldn't remember like, a videotape camcorder or an 8mm or something. So they definitely did. It's enough. I would say it didn't blow me away, but it's enough, and I appreciate a lot of the cool stuff in there, so it's good.
Yeah, I mean, it's not designed to be gear porn by any means. So, right.
By any means, yeah. Cool. Anything else with the character options?
No, I think just from listening to us, you probably said, you got something?
I do. I totally forgot. Let's talk about the magic system.
I thought that was past the character options. Okay, yes, let's talk about magic system.
We've touched about it a little bit. We talked about, so there are 4 kind of spell casting magical systems in this. So we talked before about how the innocence works, where as you go up in ranks, you have a +1 penalty for each rank above novice. One of the other things they put in here is witnesses. This kind of reminds me now of Carl of Mage. Mage from White Wolf. I know about it. I've never really played it.
I never played it either.
If you break reality, it kind of messes with you. That people see it. It's kind of the same thing. And this is for adult witnesses. So for every adult witness that can see or hear you, you have a -2 on your arcane rolls. Which is pretty harsh. It's kind of saying that like their lack of innocence, they're kind of being cynicism or whatever, stout reality is kind of dampening down magic. So that's cool. It seems a little bit hard, but they definitely wanted to keep magic within the realm of the kids. I think it's also cool, Carl, in this way is that like, I mean, it's weird because you have like, I think of something where, you don't want the kids who have magic to just go crazy and take over the town, because that doesn't make sense, right? Like, if they have just magical ability and just all these adults are watching. But, there is kind of a lot of flavor of, like, I would say Firestarter here. Remember that? Or Stranger Things? Yep. Where in that, like, they're pretty powerful even against adults. So I think this is meant to just kind of it's kind of mostly, it's going to be leaning more on the side of keeping kids not like the power level of D&D characters where they could just take over the town, basically.
Right.
But it's going to kind of mess with it. You can't really do that kind of Firestarter, Total Stranger and Things thing because they're just not, you're taking a negative 20 to your roll and it's not going to work. Do you want to talk about anything there before I bring up the different types or just go?
No, I think, again, when adults are around, Santa Claus doesn't show up. I mean, that's the flavor they're trying to get to.
Yep. Cool. So let's talk about the arcane backgrounds. First, we have belief. This is kind of the dream. When they say belief, this is kind of the dreamer, where you just have this wild imagination and you just believe that specifically that objects hold power. So, there's always that person that had some random thing and they were like, this thing has meaning to me. This is, it's the kind of going back to like mana, the original kind of term for mana, like just that items have power and what your perception of the item is gives it power. And that's what they're all about. They're a spirit-based one. Their whole mechanic is they start with one starting power and they have basically each of their items has the full amount of power points. So each item has its own kind of pool of power points, I think. Now, I'll just say this now, Carl. I was very confused with a lot of these. I think they could have done a better job explaining it. I was very confused of like, well, does each power, like they said, oh, each of the items gets your full amount of power points in it, and then all of your power points go into it. But then it's like you can have new items, and each of the items, it was very confusing. I thought that. So does each item share a pool? Do they each have their own? I think they each have their own, but I was confused. Also, it talks about like when you roll a 1, the item basically loses power. And then it was like, oh, you can get a new item that has power to you. Well, does that mean you have to take the new power edge, which is what you usually take to get a new power and ascribe it to an item? So I was definitely kind of confused. I don't know if you were confused the way these were written at all.
It wasn't, I guess I kind of glossed over that a little bit. It wasn't clear how all these items worked. I just thought, oh, an item represents a power that that you imbibe in it. But they added mechanics around it. So I thought more flavor, but it's not flavor. It's not trappings. They're actually trying to add some mechanics, and that's where the confusion comes from. That it's more than just trappings,
Yeah, because even so in this background and some of the other backgrounds, when you roll a 1, you basically you lose access to your power. And then it says basically once you believe another item has power, it gains back the power. So if say you were casting Banish and you rolled a 1, then you would lose your dream catcher or something that you were thinking that could banish evil spirits or whatever. So it wasn't really clear. They didn't give it really any mechanics like it takes this long to do it, or you have to, it's definitely role-playing wise. I just see that might be some issue with the GM of like, oh, I just pick up this rock and I think this has power. So they didn't really even say, at the very least, it should be like a day or an item through role-playing. They didn't really talk about that, which I felt like was a little bit of a weak part. Also, some of the arcane backgrounds have their own specific power. There's a new power. So for this one, they changed Summon Ally. And I actually really like what they did with Summon Ally here. They gave them unique things instead of the ones in the book. I don't know if you saw that. They gave them kind of like imaginary friend. Then there's like this different creatures from the book, like the monster under the bed and the closet monster. So I like that it was cool that they changed it.
That was kind of
any thoughts on this, or do you want to move on to the next one?
I think you nailed it. I think you did.
Okay. The next one is Gadgetry. This is extremely similar to Belief, but it's a smarts-based one. And in the trapping, instead of the imagination, this is like the character from, I believe it was the Goonies. I forget his name. He would make all the little inventions.
Right. It's basically that guy. I forget his name. Yeah, I forget his name.
But basically that. So it's a lot like Weird Science. But it's plays exactly the same as the Gadgeteer, as the Belief, the Dreamer, where you have one power. You start with one power. That's the item that has your power points. And when you roll a 1, your item breaks, and then you have to make it again. This one seemed a little bit more kind of concrete, that you'd have to have some time, like, when you're like resting somewhere to kind of make a new item. But it has the similar, it's basically the same, which is a smarts-based one. Their thing is called Weird Science. Their unique power that they can take, which is you can kind of make this like a cybernetic automaton, like a little robot, basically. That doesn't really. It's not like an ally. It just kind of like does a couple of commands if you only get a success, and then later on,
and it's
if you get a
heroic.
raise,
and it's a heroic rank.
And it's heroic. I felt weird about this one. Like, it seems like the summon ally is so much better, like in every way. I don't know. I don't know. What did you feel about this? And mainly, I guess, the summon ally. I mean, the weird science power.
Well, I thought the heroic was the problem with heroic, right? Is because we got innocence we play into, so you have to go through a bunch of ranks, and so now you're older. But now there's time that you can
-3.
Yeah, build these automaton kind of thing that works with you. So I don't know. It's only because it's heroic. Otherwise, it's kind of cool, I think. But
yeah, it's again, it doesn't really bring much to the table besides belief. I mean, mechanically, I would think belief's better, but it gives you the flavor of the gadgetry. Then we have psychokinesis. This is your classic, you think Firestarter, you think 11 from Stranger Things. You start with 2 powers. It's a smart spaced one. It pretty much has your classic psychic, psionic powers. This one was really interesting. Now, they do talk about that they're always girls, and then they have a little section about gender in here where they talk about that the GM may allow other people to, which does seem weird because I guess they're kind of, again, leading into like Firestarter and Stranger Things, I guess, right. Mainly. Or Carrie, too, right? Where you have like them being mainly girls have these power, but
it just seemed weird that they would even have to say anything about it. It's just let whoever wants to. I mean, I get it. It's the movies have decided that this was a thing, but I don't even know.
But there's other movies where, yeah. So yeah, the other weird thing is, so in here where you roll a 1, you get like fatigued basically. Now they also have this whole mechanic called brain drain. Where at the end of the scene where you use powers, you have to roll a vigor roll with a -1 to each power point that you used in the scene, which is kind of a weird way to remember it. And then you get fatigue if you fail the roll. Also, for every I believe it's for every like 10 witnesses that see your power, you have another -1 on your roll. So that's on top of the normal -2 minus for witnesses, the normal -2. I was very confused by this, Carl. I really don't know why they put this in here. This seems like overtly harsh. I mean, the psychokinesis doesn't really get much like over the other ones that we've just talked about, except that they get 2 powers to start, and they don't lose their powers when they roll a 1. They just get fatigued.
I think this would would make sense if this was the only arcane background there was. And so you're thinking about like Stranger Things, right? There is only one, and they're unique to the world in a sense. And so that's what they're trying to show. It's like they used their power, they pushed themselves, and so they get fatigued through it. But then it's like, oh, by the way, there's these other arcane backgrounds that don't have that problem, that can exist in this world side by side. So they're trying to drive flavor that is harsh, kind of based on there is this one and only. That's how I felt. It's like, well, if that's the only thing, I get it, because they're trying to create a certain flavor. But, oh, by the way, there's these other arcane backgrounds that exist as well that don't have that problem.
Yeah, and I just don't understand why. Like, they don't have a unique power, but I think they have some unique, like they get only access to stuff like telekinesis, and I think Puppet. So they do have, or I guess storytelling gets Puppet, but there's I didn't I'm not like going through with fine tooth comb, but I think besides telekinesis they might have some special ones in there. I'm completely flabbergasted. I get what you said. If it was the only one, it kind of make more sense as far as that stuff. But you already have all these penalties when it comes to like arcane backgrounds, like the innocents and the witnesses. So I'm actually really flabbergasted because there's no the only kind of, maybe if there was like some edges that made them more powerful, but honestly the only edges in there that are for they do have the only specific edges, but they're just to help with the brain drain, the vigor roll in the end. They just make it easier, and it's not even that good. It's like, oh, you get like it, you take you ignore 1 point, you ignore 2 points. Like, it just seems really overly harsh, especially like you said, Carl, when it comes in comparison to the other one. So this one was kind of almost one of the weakest points of the books to me. I just did not understand why this was here when they, and especially when they feel like when you talk about all of the arcane backgrounds and the flavor of them in the movies, these should be the most powerful. 11, Firestarter girl, which I don't remember her name. Like, these were like super powerful. And if they're like, if there was some way, maybe we're missing something, Carl, but like, if there was something that made them more powerful, then this would make more sense to kind of keep them in check, just because they don't, burn down the whole town. But when you have somebody who's just like a dreamer, and when you have somebody who's just like, good with like Legos and like, some like whatever, like little robot kit they got, that is like equally and maybe even more powerful than them, just doesn't make any sense in my mind. So this is one of the probably biggest misses in my opinion, unless we're missing something.
No, I don't know. Maybe we are missing something, but I agree. I think it's flavor that found its way into mechanics, which then messed up with the balance.
Yeah,
against the other arcane.
Cool. Let's talk about the final one. Is you brought up before. It's storytelling. You have 3 PowerPoints. It's a smarts one, which is weird to me. I thought it'd be spirit, but I guess it's like knowledge of stories. I don't know. I thought, yeah, whatever. So there's 3 smarts powers and 1 spirit. So you have the most starting powers of any. You have 10. It works similar to.
Well, we have 10 power points and 3 starting powers. You meant?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
They kind of have I would say they have the smallest spell powers available, right. And they're very much more of that like kind of bardic. If you think of bards, they kind of have more of like the debuffs and buffs and kind of random stuff, little random stuff in there. They kind of have the same thing where if they roll a 1, they just are fatigued on their skill die. So again, this is a little bit harsher than the normal spellcasting. And then their special power is Ward, which is actually, I liked Ward a lot. It's a very cool power. It kind of makes it so a specific type of monster, they choose a specific monster, and then it kind of makes a, circle of protection, basically, where it's harder for things to get in, and if they are in, they take negatives. I think that was really cool. And
again, I guess the game master's got to lean into that, and if the storyteller decides vampires are their thing, there's got to be a reason why, and hopefully you, as a game master, better be some vampires in your story at some point.
Yeah, I think if they're using Ward, you're fighting a vampire probably. You know what kind of foe you're facing. So I like Storyteller. Storyteller's good. Again, it's a small one, but here's another part where I was a little confused, where I can even just read this. Where is it? They say right here, the range of a Storyteller's power is equal to their smarts die. That's how normal powers work. I'm not sure where they put that there. All targets must be in range and must be able to hear and understand the Storyteller's words to be affected. Again, that's how normal powers work, usually. I guess not always be here. I guess, sorry, my bad. Usually you don't have to maybe understand what people are saying. It just works. But then here, where it confuses me, is that they say the number of targets is limited only by these factors. I think they meant by these factors. Little grammar problem there. Again, there was a little bit confused. Like, does that mean that you just affect all targets? I guess I'm not really understand why they even put that line there. So this was another part where I was a little confused, Carl. I don't know if you felt the same way.
So I think I missed that nuance. I see where you're coming from. You're talking about normally the powers have a certain, within the power has some limitations as far as, whether it's blast template or whatever. And this is saying, well, as long as a target can hear it, it's affected. Is that what it's saying? Or is it saying what the spell says is what it's saying? So I guess that's going to have to be somebody's call. If it's really just anybody who's can hear it is affected, that can be pretty impressive as far as
I mean, because when you look at like protection, right? Like protection usually works on one target, and then then there's mods that you can use, 1 power point, to affect additional targets. So does that mean you just ignored that and it affects everybody? I guess. And the downside is that people have to hear you and understand what you're saying to be affected by this. So I was a little confused by that. And again, this was kind of the whole power section. Again, was like kind of it could have been better explained, I think. Any final thoughts on powers before we move on?
I think they tried to give that feeling of the different. It felt like, for me though, it felt things like storytelling and belief were sort of, hey, we need more arcane backgrounds, so we kind of are creating ones that allow for powers. They felt a little shoehorned in, maybe just for the way I thought of it. Versus, movies always have this gadgeteer type person doing things that are kind of crazy, and they've got the psychokinetic, and that makes a lot of sense. But then now there's somebody who can weave a spell by just reading a story or doing something along those lines. It makes sense to have it, to round it out. But it feels kind of like, well, we needed some additional background. So here's an additional background that kind of plays a little bit into it. But maybe I just haven't seen all the movies that this game is based on, and some of the movies this is like right out of it or whatever. So
I'd almost say that for the GM side, the GM would be like, okay, I will allow this archetype and this spellcasting background in, basically. It makes sense for what I want to do. Is how I see it. But it definitely needs some tweaks here. I overall like it. I just think that it could have definitely done a better job of explaining it, and there definitely could be arguments or how different groups play it differently. Cool. Let's move on to our final section before our overall view is GM tools. So let's talk about it, man.
And it has some.
Oh yeah, it has some. Let's first talk about it's we'll just say this right now. I was actually kind of blown away that this was all in here. So let's talk about the first thing. They have a plot point adventure, Carl.
Well, there are a lot of settings that have plot points as part of the adventure, and this one is one of them, and it's a good sized one. I'm gonna be honest, I did not read the plot point adventure and go through and see whether it was interesting or not, or how it all flowed, because someone might run it for me, and unless I'm going to run it, I don't want to read the plot point adventure and then spoil it for myself. But it really there's a lot of meat here, I think, is the bottom line for you to use and just pick it up and start playing.
I didn't fully read it, but I skipped through it, and they did definitely seem like they did a good job with kind of giving flavor and stuff.
But
to me, the plot point is not the most exciting part. Yeah, I would say I appreciate that way more than the plot point campaign, personally, and they have Savage Tales, and they have a lot of Savage Tales, Carl.
There's a lot of material.
I was surprised. A lot of material, short but sweet, I would say. Just giving you kind of something a GM could just quickly pick up, kind of read over and implement, right? I mean, you GM Savage Worlds more than me, so how did you feel about some of these to Savage Tales?
No, I think they did a really nice job. I mean, they definitely are the flavor of the one-sheets, the classic Savage Tales. I think they did a really nice job. The plot point campaigns, it's nice it's there. Again, I didn't read through it, but that's another really nice part of this book is it's easy to say I'm printing out a setting book that has this flavor, gives you this feel, but then to bring in some adventures and some stuff that people can just pick out. There's like one on about a ghost ship. There's ones about things, monsters, hunting, everything that's kind of on. And there's something there if you want to. And I this is kind of aside, but if you're doing a game where somebody just says, "Hey, let's do a pickup game," and this book with the archetypes, with the Savage Tales, with all this kind of material there, you can probably whip something up pretty quick and have a really nice night of gaming with classic tropes that everybody is going to know, and they're going to be loving it, and they're going to be laughing. So as an aside, I think there's really a lot of good material for that.
Oh, I totally agree with you, man. And each of these Savage Tales have their own kind of monster that we'll talk about a little bit, but which I really appreciate. So they each have their own like flavor, and there's just a ton of them in here. And it's a good point for you. You could definitely just a pickup game. You could just use this book and not even have pre-gens. I mean, that's amazing to me. This is like a great setting. This is a great book for that. That if a GM knows this, you could do a pickup game with people at a convention, just whatever random night, and have a really good time. Now let's talk about the next part of this, which is I was mostly excited about that. They have an adventure creator, and I would say usually these aren't that good or they're a little lackluster. Oh man, did they put a lot of meat in this, Carl? I don't know. Did you read through this? Because there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, this is a 8 component. So there's 8 different steps here with some optional ones. They really covered all the bases. Now each one has maybe like a D8 or a D6 options, but they're kind of a little bit general too, so you can still kind of customize each one. And then they also, besides just the rollable tables, they also have a whole putting together section, and they do a example. they actually go through, and there's a whole page on just how one might do it and how one might come, which is like such a cherry on top. I thought like that's such a nice touch to kind of like, if somebody could see this and be like, well, I don't really understand how you could put it all together. Well, here not only do we describe how you put it together, but here we also said, here's an example of how we did it. So I thought this was awesome. This is a really good way to make some unique things and then still put your own spin on it and help GMs do this. So what did you think, Carl?
Well, and I know there's many settings that have adventure generators that are, you kind of pick a couple of components, you roll. But I think this particular book, like you said, they put a lot of meat. You know, sometimes adventure generators, they say, let's talk like one of the first components, theme mood. If you roll a 1, you have this thing all about the law. A lot of them would just say, oh, it's about law enforcement and they got rules and thank you. Okay, great.
Yeah.
This one gives you a paragraph, gives you examples. It says, oh, it could be like stealing something to save it from a thief. It could be... And then, like you said, later you take this and it gives you an example how to tie it all together. So they did a really nice job of not just kind of throwing and say, hey, I've got some random tables you can roll on to create an adventure.
Yeah.
I'm giving you some feel on how this all could work together. They did a really nice job.
Nice job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Let's talk about the final thing that we would talk about in every review is the bestiary. There is one. Hallelujah. I think this was, I'll just say it, I really like the bestiary. They're definitely tied into a lot of the Savage Tales on the PowerPoint, but they really, not only do they have the classic kind of monsters that you think of, like Monster Squad monsters, I mean, they went a little deep here, man, with some of the American mythology. I mean, we have Wendigos in here. We have
Bigfoots.
A lot of these. I forget what they're called. Cryptozoology.
Cryptozoology.
I mean,
Yep.
Yeah. Crypto, whatever. Where is the actual? Here we go. They beside just the normal things you think of like werewolves and vampires. I mean, we got changelings in here, which is we're talking about fey changelings. The Chocoloco monster, things like Closet Monster. Yeah, I mean a lot of cool, and I'm a big mythology guy. I did storytelling for a little bit. I have a huge collection of mythology from around the world and a lot of American mythology. We got so they did a really good job of drawing from media and also kind of like old school mythology, which I was just kind of again very surprised with.
And if you're into ET, they even have the friendly alien as something in the bestiary. Yeah.
I mean, they got a Pudgy Wudgy. a Puckwudgie. It's just crazy. So again, and here's the bullies in here. So
and it's a good size.
Loving it.
It's a good size. There's a lot here there's a lot to use for sure. Yeah.
And each of the creatures, like, it's not just kind of a simple block. Each of the creatures has like some kind of a little blurb about them, which I really appreciate, and like not just like one sentence, like a paragraph or two, and kind of has unique flavor and some unique stuff in there. So yeah, really cool. Anything to say on that, or you want to go to the overall final
awesome
review?
Stuff. It's just awesome stuff. Yep.
So our overall view, first thing we usually talk about is our favorite and least favorite parts. Carl, let's start with least favorite, because then we can end on the favorite. What do you have any kind of least favorite things in here?
There's, I mean, we're talking nitpicking right now. I mean, this is, overall, this is a really good book. But like I mentioned on Arcane Backgrounds, how again, and I think we hit on it a lot. The psychokinetic is not as powerful. Well, should be more powerful, but there's a flavor to it. But then, where does the storyteller play in? The Arcane Backgrounds probably could be tightened up a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The Arcane Backgrounds, specifically mechanically the psychokinesis and their kind of negatives. We talked about it a lot. Also, the way they kind of described it was a little confusing. The other thing to me that I'll have to bring up again is the PDF bookmarks are just atrocious here. Really, It might seem small to some people, but to me, it's just a big thing. I really look for, if I'm paying money for something that's at least $20, I kind of expect the better bookmarks. And then again, I think we talked about it. It's not a huge deal, but the map really, I wouldn't say it's not a huge deal. It's a deal. There definitely could have, for the crazy amount of story and plot points and adventures and flavor, and art. It's crazy. There's no map, so. Okay. Well, on that note, let's talk about the favorite things. I'll go first this time. I absolutely, the archetypes are great. They did an amazing job, setting that up. Another favorite of mine is the bestiary. I mean, I just love that there's bestiary here, and that they really drew from not just the classic stuff, but some kind of deeper cuts of mythology. The adventure creator and all that stuff. I think they did just an amazing job on that. What about you, Carl? What were your kind of favorite things?
I'm right with you. The archetypes and that ability to just kind of whip a character that has that flavor up in a minute, and then kind of aligning that with that overall, I can pick this up and create, just start running it in an evening once I read the book. So that's not a favorite thing. It's just archetypes play into that as something that you can do. So I thought that was fantastic.
All right. Well, this comes to our final rating. I think I assume what you were going to say, and maybe people at home. So what we use a very simple review structure on buy, try, or pass by. Buy is generally, we think this thing is complete. It does what it was set out to do, and it's for the money that you pay for it. It's definitely fully worth it, that you should support it and look in the future for their projects, et cetera, et cetera. Try is, we like a lot of the stuff in there, but there's either it doesn't really quite deliver on its promise, or there's kind of a lot of issues in it, but it's still something that we think that you should check out if you're interested in that kind of thing. And pass by is, we just think there's kind of too many issues in it, or it just falls flat completely. So on that note, Carl, what rating do you give it?
This is a strong buy. There is so much. Again, it nails the genre, it nails the feel, it nails the, all the pieces you need there. This is one complete package. And even if you're not into 80s movies, the bestiary gives you a lot of great stuff. The flavor, even the setting, you could pull some cool elements out of the setting piece of it and leverage it. So it's got a lot of material for you to use, even if you're not into that genre. But if you're into it and you want to do an 80s kid feel kind of thing, man, this has got you covered. So definitely a buy on this one.
I concur completely. This is a strong buy for me. I was blown away by the amount, and not just, you could have a lot and not be good, but just the amount of the attention to detail, the awareness of what they're trying to do, what they set out to do to give you this experience. I mean, they went so deep with all of this stuff. And again, not even if you're not too familiar, or the 80s thing isn't like, oh, I loved the Goonies and I loved Stand By Me, I loved all these 80s movies. Like, even if you don't have that, to just play in the world of a child at this point of time, which I think was kind of an interesting time, they just deliver so much on putting you in that mind space and giving the GM tools to do that, giving the players tools to do that. They really did not skimp out in any single way. This is an extremely strong buy. I am pretty excited. I want to play this. I want to try to run this. Maybe we'll do a one shot in the future and we'll record it for.
You're making a lot of promises. That's hard.
I am making a lot of promises.
I believe we also have the Savage Pathfinder. Yeah. We got a lot of stuff there.
Yep. But again, this is a strong buy. Cool. So again, you can find this on Drive-Thru RPG. Is that right? Drive-Thru RPG.
Yep.
I was confused with the old names, and it's $20 for the PDF. For sure, worth it. Give it a shot. Okay, play us the outro, Carl.
So again, this was Tabletop Tango. You had Carl with Eric. And we appreciate you listening. Hopefully this was useful. If you like it, subscribe. Not looking to be famous as always, but boy, would it be cool to see the numbers go up. That's my spiel now.
And on that note, if you have any other settings you want us to check out, that we haven't heard of, post them in the comments. I think the next thing we'll do is the kaiju one, right?
Yeah.
That's the next in the docket.
I forget the name of the book. I'm not a Japanese.
It's the kaiju one. It's a kaiju one. And then we'll try to get that Pathfinder one.
So we can play Pacific Rim, I guess, is the whole point.
Pacific Rim, Godzilla, Power Rangers, I guess, all those kind of things. Cool.
Okay, well, great. Thanks again, and we will catch you next time. This is Tabletop Tango. We'll see you.
Be safe. Have fun.
It's a savage world, strange as a wind war. It's a savage world, classics to explore. It's a savage world in the land of the